It always starts the same. A group loud with confidence but hollow with insecurity. Conversations filled with easy laughs, surface-level validation, and recycled opinions. Everyone agrees. Everyone conforms. Everyone fits in. And then it happens. The mood shifts. Eyes dart. Tension rises. Not because someone said something wrong, but because someone walked in who doesn't need to say anything at all. That presence? It's not dramatic. It's not loud. But it shatters the illusion everyone's been feeding off. That presence is the Sigma male. He's not there to dominate. He's not there to challenge. He simply exists outside of their framework. No performance, no approval seeking, no emotional camouflage. And that makes him dangerous not to their safety, but to their comfort. Weak groups aren't built on strength. They're built on silent pacts to stay mediocre together. The Sigma doesn't just ignore those pacts. He reveals them for what they are. Cages dressed as communities. And when you bring a man who's free into a room full of people pretending they are, you don't get inspiration. You get collective guilt. Guilt that they aren't that free. Guilt that they never tried to be. Guilt that someone walked in with the courage they've been avoiding for years. He didn't insult them. He didn't confront them. He didn't even acknowledge them. But that's the power of the Sigma. Let's break down the 10 savage reasons why weak groups collapse internally around the man who reminds them of everything they're not. 1. He doesn't need group approval, which exposes everyone who does. When one man walks freely, the chains around others start to feel heavier. The Sigma male is immune to the social currency that dominates weak groups' validation. He doesn't walk into a room hoping to be accepted. He walks in already whole, and that in itself is threatening. Weak groups survive on approval-based survival. Everyone gives a little piece of themselves up to fit in. But the Sigma? He walks in intact. He doesn't conform. He doesn't edit. And he sure as hell doesn't explain. That kind of presence acts like a spotlight shining directly on those who have built their identities on borrowed acceptance. They see a man who doesn't chase praise, and it makes them question why they do. It's not his words that offend them, it's what he doesn't need that does. Suddenly, every fake laugh, every shallow compliment, every unspoken compromise becomes more obvious. He didn't expose their desperation. They did just by comparing themselves to him. 2. He makes silence loud. The quieter he is, the louder your insecurities become. A Sigma doesn't fill the room with noise. He doesn't dominate with chatter or bend himself into comfortable small talk. His silence is purposeful, and in a world where everyone is screaming to be seen, that silence is disarming. It unsettles people not because it's rude, but because it invites reflection. Weak groups use volume as a distraction. If there's always something to laugh at, gossip about, or complain over, nobody has to confront themselves. The Sigma's stillness punctures that safety net. He doesn't interrupt their chaos, he makes it echo. And in that echo, every unresolved insecurity begins to surface. It becomes harder to laugh off the emptiness when a man in the corner isn't playing along. People aren't triggered by what the Sigma says. They're haunted by what he makes them hear about themselves. 3. He doesn't flinch at social pressure. The moment he refuses to flinch, you're forced to realize how often you do. Most people in fragile social groups conform the second tension rises. One disapproving look, one sarcastic jab, and they shrink. But not the Sigma. When the pressure is on, he doesn't adapt, he stabilizes. And that control unnerves people. The group may try subtle tactics, snide comments, isolating energy, backhanded jokes. They're used to people folding under this weight. But the Sigma's lack of reaction only amplifies their own fragility. He doesn't resist because he's combative. He simply sees no reason to justify his existence. And in a room full of people built on validation loops, someone who doesn't flinch under scrutiny becomes a walking contradiction to their values. Every time he holds his frame, he silently calls out everyone who gave theirs up, not with words, but with presence. 4. He's unavailable for drama, and that starves the chaos addicts. He doesn't ignore drama, he makes it irrelevant. In groups addicted to drama, chaos is currency. It's how people bond. They feed off complaints, rivalries, and emotional outbursts like oxygen. But the Sigma doesn't react. He doesn't indulge gossip. He doesn't validate petty tension. He observes it, then starves it. This calm detachment cuts deeper than any insult. When manipulators can't provoke him, they panic. They need his reaction to feel seen. They need his outrage to justify their existence. When the Sigma offers none, their entire script falls apart. The group is left scrambling, unable to turn their energy into anything useful. His absence of chaos becomes more powerful than any presence of conflict. And in that vacuum, they realize something painful. The Sigma doesn't need the storm, they do. And without him playing along, they're just noise with no audience. 5. He sees through groupthink, and that makes him dangerous. The man who thinks for himself exposes the cowardice in those who never have. Groupthink is comfortable. It offers a ready-made sense of belonging. Just agree, nod, repeat, and you're accepted. But when a Sigma shows up, that illusion cracks. He doesn't just disagree, he doesn't even engage on the same wavelength. He questions what others blindly accept. This isn't rebellion for the sake of attention. It's clarity. And that clarity is radioactive in a crowd built on delusion. Suddenly, what once passed as truth begins to look suspiciously like compromise. The Sigma doesn't need your consensus to validate his reality. He's already vetted it himself. And that makes others feel small, not because he tries to shrink them, but because he reminds them how often they've silenced their own thoughts to keep the peace. To weak groups, independent thought isn't refreshing, it's threatening. Because it means someone had the courage to step out of the fog they're still hiding in. 6. He doesn't need to be liked, and that makes him unstoppable. The man who doesn't care to be liked holds the most dangerous kind of power, self-authorship. Most people in fragile groups are governed by fear of exclusion. They laugh when they want to disagree. They follow when they want to lead. But not the Sigma. He doesn't calculate his worth through other people's approval. This terrifies the group, because someone who can't be controlled through rejection is someone who can't be manipulated at all. When he says no, it means no. When he doesn't laugh, it's because it wasn't funny. And when he walks away, it's because staying wasn't worth his time. He's not cruel, he's clean. And that kind of boundary-based existence is alien to those who base their self-worth on how well they fit in. The Sigma isn't immune to loneliness, he just values truth more than comfort. And that makes him the one thing weak groups can't handle: untouchable. 7. He's immune to emotional blackmail. If you can't guilt him, you can't trap him. Weak groups often rely on emotional manipulation to control behavior. The guilt trip, the silent treatment, the veiled threat of exile. These tactics work on those desperate to belong. But the Sigma? He's immune. His self-worth is internally sourced. He doesn't fold under pressure because his choices are principle-based, not approval-based. And when guilt tactics fall flat, manipulators lose their most reliable weapon. This is where the real panic sets in, because they can't shame him into silence, can't coax him into compliance, can't use emotions as chains. He listens, but he doesn't bend. He empathizes, but he doesn't absorb. And when the group realizes their emotional warfare has no effect, they're left exposed, powerless, seen. The Sigma doesn't fight manipulation, he renders it obsolete. 8. He lives by standards, not social scripts. He doesn't follow the script because he's too busy writing his own code. There's an unspoken code in every weak group: stay agreeable, don't outshine, laugh on cue, and never challenge the hierarchy. But the Sigma walks in with his own code and lives by it. He doesn't play by rules that weren't made for him. He holds standards that often expose the lack of them in others. His code isn't flexible to avoid offense. It's solid to avoid compromise. And in that rigidity, there's freedom. People say they respect high standards until those standards reject them. The Sigma isn't afraid to walk away from what doesn't meet his values. That's not arrogance, that's integrity. And weak groups can't fake that level of self-governance. He doesn't lecture. He doesn't demand. He just refuses to lower the bar. And when others can't reach it, they label him cold. But the truth is, they've just never been around someone who meant every word he said. 9. He doesn't chase belonging, he redefines it. He doesn't try to fit in, he makes others question why they ever did. Belonging is a powerful drug. Most will do anything for a hit of inclusion, even sell out their authenticity. But the Sigma, he sees belonging as a byproduct of alignment, not a goal. He doesn't compromise to be accepted. He stays true and lets alignment happen or not. And that level of detachment isn't apathy, it's evolution. It forces others to reconsider what they've been chasing. The Sigma's presence says, you don't need to be like them to be whole. And in a room full of identity chameleons, that's jarring. People don't just envy his independence, they resent what it exposes in themselves. Because he reminds them that real belonging starts when you stop begging for it. 10. He's a walking reminder that they settled. You can't hate what he is until you admit what you gave up. The real trigger isn't what the Sigma says or does, it's what he represents. He's a mirror that reflects every compromise, every abandoned dream, every time they chose comfort over courage. He doesn't walk in with judgment, but judgment forms anyway inside the minds of those who realize they settled. Settled for less than their worth, settled for comfort over calling, settled for being liked instead of being honest. His confidence doesn't come from ego, it comes from ownership, and ownership makes excuses evaporate. When people see him thriving without their tactics, without their masks, without their compromises, they can't ignore their own reflections. They hate him not because he's arrogant, but because he's free. And freedom, when you've lived in chains for too long, looks like betrayal. On a final note, the Sigma doesn't expose you with insults, he exposes you with presence. He didn't try to outshine you. He didn't argue. He didn't need to prove a single thing. And yet he disrupted everything. Not because he was loud, not because he was aggressive, but because he reminded you without saying a word of the man you could have been if you hadn't traded your soul for social approval. The Sigma doesn't need you to like him. He doesn't need to be understood. He doesn't even care if you talk behind his back. He's not here for your comfort. He's here to remind you of your potential. And the truth is, if his presence triggers guilt, maybe it's not him that's the problem. Maybe it's what you've been avoiding in the mirror. That's the real fear. And that's why the Sigma never needs to fight, because reality fights for him.